Luis, you've been quiet since takeoff. Everything okay?
Yeah. Gloria, I had this weird dream last night. It really messed with me.
A dream? What happened?
You were in it. There was this narrator's voice, like we were characters in a story. We had the worst day at work. That's so real. I
The
can't
air
shake
inside
it.
the cabin is thick,
It felt too
recycled
real.
through 1,000
Like our
lungs
whole
until it
lives were
tastes of
just
nothing but
being
dust
narrated.
and exhaustion. Luis pushes the heavy service cart down the narrow aisle, his knuckles white against the cold metal handle. Every inch of movement feels like a battle against the floor's slight incline. He stops at row 8. A passenger in 8C does not look up from his screen, just snaps his fingers toward the seat cushion. The sound cuts through the low hum of the engines. The passenger points a finger, his eyes narrowing as he inspects the material. "Excuse me, is this leather?" The question hangs in the cramped space, heavy and demanding. Luis freezes. The cart feels like an anchor dragging him down. He feels the muscles in his jaw tighten, a hard, pulsing knot forming beneath his skin. He is inches away from letting the mask slip, his gaze locked on the passenger's waiting face, the pressure of the cabin walls closing in. Before the retort could leave his lips, Gloria stepped into the gap. Her smile was wide, bright, and entirely hollow. She held the coffee pot like a barrier between Luis and the passenger. "It is a premium fabric designed for comfort at altitude," she chirped, the tone perfectly calibrated to dismiss the man's inquiry. The passenger blinked, his momentum stalled by her sheer, polished efficiency. Gloria turned slightly, her shoulder shielding Luis from the man's view. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped into a razor-sharp whisper that cut through the cabin noise. "Do not." Luis felt the heat of his anger dissipate, replaced by the cold reality of their position. He forced his lips into a rigid, thin line. He looked at the floor, then back at the passenger, his jaw finally relaxing. "I was not going to say anything," he muttered, though the lie felt heavy on his tongue. Gloria did not wait for his justification. She kept moving, her gaze scanning the rows with clinical precision. "You were going to say something," she countered, her voice devoid of warmth. They reached row 11. The cabin light flickered, casting long, erratic shadows over the passengers. A man in the window seat leaned out, his hand outstretched, demanding the entire plastic bottle of water rather than a cup. Luis hesitated, his hand hovering over the cold, condensation-slicked plastic. He felt the weight of the request. He glanced at Gloria, his brow furrowed. "He wants the bottle," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. Gloria did not look up from her clipboard. Her pen moved with rhythmic, aggressive precision. "I heard," she replied, her tone flat. Luis asked, his uncertainty palpable. Gloria stopped moving. Her posture became perfectly vertical, her shoulders squared against the aisle. She did not turn her head, but her voice was absolute. "No." Luis let out a sharp, jagged sigh. His shoulders slumped for a fraction of a second. He moved the cart forward, leaving the man behind while he mouthed a silent question to Gloria. She did not blink. "Nobody gets the bottle." They reached row 16. A child was rhythmically slamming his heels into the seat back, a dull, repetitive thud that vibrated through the frame. The parents were slumped in a deep, oblivious sleep, their heads lolling against the windows. Luis stopped the cart, staring at the rhythmic assault on the plastic. His jaw tightened in sympathy with the passenger in front. "How long?" he asked, his voice low. Gloria watched the seat vibrate. She did not look at the parents. "Since before you were born," she said. Luis let out a dry, humorless laugh. "It feels that way." Gloria crouched, her movements fluid and practiced. She reached into the side pocket of the cart, pulling out a coloring book with a sharp, crisp slide. She placed it onto the child's tray table. The kicking stopped instantly. The child leaned forward, mesmerized by the pages. Gloria stood, smoothing her hands over her sides with a sharp, precise motion. Luis watched her, genuinely baffled by the sudden silence. "Where did that come from?" he asked. Gloria kept walking, her pace steady and rhythmic. "I have a system. I have 17 systems. You benefit from all of them. You are welcome." They pushed through the curtain and into the galley. The sudden absence of the cabin noise was jarring, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like a physical pressure. Luis let the cart roll to a stop, his hands trembling slightly. As he pulled them away from the metal, he moved to the jump seat, his legs stretching out until his heels hit the opposite wall. He did not look at Gloria. He just stared at the floor, watching the subtle vibrations of the floorboards beneath his feet. Gloria leaned back against the counter, her weight shifting as she finally let her shoulders drop. The rigid posture dissolved into a slump. She reached up, rubbing the back of her neck with a slow, deliberate motion. The air in the galley felt stale, trapped. Luis let out a long, ragged breath that seemed to deflate his entire frame. 2 hours left, he said, his voice raspy. Gloria did not move. She stared at the ceiling, her eyes tracking the flickering overhead light. 2, she repeated. Luis broke the stillness, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman in 4A said I had a lovely accent, then asked me to repeat everything twice. He looked up, his brow furrowed in frustration. Gloria turned, her gaze lingering on his face. Her expression softened, the hard lines around her mouth relaxing. Like a parrot, she said. Luis nodded, a small, involuntary twitch at the corner of his lips. Like a parrot. Gloria shook her head, her eyes bright with a sudden, sharp amusement. You are not a parrot. You are more of a very tired golden retriever. Luis groaned, throwing his head back against the bulkhead. That is worse. Gloria let out a short, genuine laugh, the sound crisp and clean. She reached for the coffee pot, her movements fluid as she refilled his cup. The steam rose between them, curling into the cramped space. Luis watched her, the tension in his shoulders finally giving way. Gloria leaned against the counter, her posture no longer rigid but loose and easy. Luis stared at the floor, his fingers tracing the edge of the jump seat. Next rotation, I am putting in for Tokyo, he said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the galley air. Gloria paused, her hands stilling on the counter. She looked at him, then quickly shifted her gaze to a stack of napkins. You say that every time, she replied, her voice steadying. I mean it, Luis insisted. I meant it the time before that, too. Gloria stopped moving. The silence stretched, thick and demanding. She looked back at him, her eyes searching his face for a sign of hesitation. I would put in for Tokyo too if you went, she said. The admission hung there, raw and unshielded. Luis looked up, catching her eye, and the air in the galley seemed to thin. Gloria immediately turned away, reaching for a row of cups that were already perfectly aligned. Don't make it weird, she said, her back to him. Luis shifted, his face betraying a flicker of something he could not hide. I am not making it weird, he replied. You are doing the face, she said. Stop it. The plane tilted, the nose dipping toward the earth. Outside the window, the world dissolved into a smear of gray clouds. They moved to the jump seats, the darkness of the cabin wrapping around them like a shroud. Luis stared at the floor, his hands resting flat on his knees. Same time next week, he said. Gloria leaned her head back against the bulkhead, her eyes tracing the dim light of the cabin ceiling. Amsterdam, she replied. I am getting a stroopwafel. Luis looked at her, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. You get one every time. She did not look away from the ceiling. They are perfect, Luis. Some things are just perfect. She turned her head then, her gaze locking onto his with a weight that made the air in the galley feel heavy. You are the second thing. The words hung in the silence, stripped of any artifice. Luis opened his mouth to speak, but the sound cut him off. A sharp, rhythmic chime echoed through the cabin. 10 minutes to landing. The change was instantaneous. Gloria pulled her shoulders back, her spine snapping into a rigid vertical line. She stood up, her movements precise. They stood in unison, spines straight, movements synchronized by years of repetition. The cabin lights flickered, signaling the final approach. 6 hours of chaos were folded away, hidden behind the practiced, impenetrable expressions they wore like armor. Luis glanced at her, his eyes searching for a crack in the facade. Good flight, he said, his tone light. Gloria looked straight ahead, her voice deadpan, devoid of any warmth. It was not a good flight. Luis nodded, his gaze lingering on the profile of her face. No, but good company. For a heartbeat, the professional shell wavered. She finally let the real smile show, the one that only existed in the quiet of the galley, a flicker of genuine light in the dim cabin. "Don't push it," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Too late," Luis replied. The landing gear groaned as it locked into place. The chime sounded again, a sharp, final command. They stepped out into the aisle, side by side, their faces unreadable to the passengers around them. The world outside the window rushed toward them, but in the narrow space between the rows, they carried the secret of the last 6 hours. They were ready to face the world again, not as individuals, but as a unit forged in the quiet, stale air of the cabin.
Are you still taking sleeping pills to beat the jet lag?
Yes, thank God that's over. It was very dystopian.
I still can't believe you were taking those things every flight.
Hey, they worked! But yeah, good, because I like the real you.